Brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Behaviour Revolution. Hope you're enjoying these videos. I hope I'm making it clear and explaining these scriptures like really simply in everyday colloquial slang English, because that's the point about bringing the eternal blood covenant of deliverance to those of us in the 21st century, so we can really understand it easily and grasp it and not have to get a doctorate in theology to understand the simple word of Scripture, Yahusha's living words. So last episode we talked about Noach, firstly the Nephilim and then Noach, and how there was a great global flood. So we're picking up from there now. Noach's just got off the ark and he's offered up sacrifices to Yahusha, and just Yahusha's just smelt the sweet smelling savour, and he's seen the blood of the offering, and he's got Yahusha's attention through the blood. And it says that Noach had a very special relationship with Yahusha because of his behaviour, because of the way he felt and behaved towards his creator. So we're going to go on to Noach's sons now. They've come off the boat and they've had all this devastation happen all around them. Imagine the ark, they look at getting off the boat and looking at it and looking at all the scratch marks along the wood and all the bits that had been just clung to for hours, people desperately trying to save their lives, but of course they couldn't. So all this death and devastation had gone on around them. And then let's go on. Shem, Ham and Japheth were Noach's sons, and the whole earth, all the racial colours were populated from those three men. So we have the Angloid, the white man, the black man, the Asian man, all those blood types, colours, all the colours of mankind, the main three, came from Noach's three sons. That's where the races came from. We're going to find out a bit later where the languages came from, but this is where the actual colours came from, the nations came from. These three men, Shem, Ham and Japheth. So all the racial colours were populated from those three men. So after leaving the ark, with the trauma of death and destruction behind him, Noach got straight to work, farming the soil and planting vineyards. One night, he and his wife drank a lot of wine from their vineyard, and in their drunkenness, had sex and fell asleep naked in their tent. Nothing wrong with that. Husband and wife, getting it on, having a bit too much to drink from the fruit of their vines. And Kenan, Ham's pervy son, had been watching them the whole time and ran to tell his father, who did nothing about their nakedness, but instead went to have a laugh with his brothers. But Shem and Japheth didn't find this behaviour appropriate or funny. They grabbed a garment, put it over their shoulders and walked backwards, lowering it over their parents so that they wouldn't see any nakedness. And I've made a point there. They knew, from what they'd been taught obviously, that looking at nakedness and sex was unclean behaviour. Unclean behaviour. Looking at those sort of things and having that sort of behaviour made you unclean. And Yahusha is all about clean and unclean. It's religion that's brought in all the different levels of, oh, that's sin and that's not sin and that's a worse sin than this sin and you're going straight to hell and da-da-da-da-da, you've got to pay penance and da-da-da. Yahusha's not like that. Something is either clean or unclean. If you do something unclean, you are unclean and you need to make yourself clean, you know? Until, of course, Yahusha came along and he made us legally clean before the Father. So, but there's a lot of controversy around this scripture here because it sounds, if you read the original, and I'm going to take you to the BYNV for this. Let's go over to the BYNV. Noach, a man of the soil, planted a vineyard, and he drank of the vine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Kenan, saw the nakedness of his father, possibly his wife, and told his two brothers outside. So the point I want to make here is, if it was actually Ham who did the uncovering, if Ham was the one who did the crime here, then why was his son punished by Noach when Noach woke up? Why did he punish Ham's son instead of punishing Ham? Many believe that this verse here, that the term uncovered his nakedness, looked upon his nakedness, refers to seizing another man's wife. That's why that's been added in this version, possibly his wife, because uncovering, in other scriptures it says he uncovered his father's nakedness. We saw his father's nakedness. That means taking his father's wife. So many people believe that Ham actually, or even Ham's son, forced himself onto Noach's wife and raped her, therefore taking dominance. Because in that time, a man's wife, a man's woman, was one of his treasured possessions, one of his most treasured belongings. So in order to dominate another man, be El Supremo, be the head of the pack, you would conquer and you would take a man's wife and have your way with her, and that meant you now had it over him. And so you were the most dominant man there. So many believe that Ham, or Ham's son, tried to take dominance and possibly even the birthright, the inheritance. We saw that done with Reuben later on, Jacob's son. So that's a common thing that people think. But I still look at it, because it says, look down here in verse 24, and Noach awoke from his wine, and he knew what his younger son had done to him. His younger son. Ham wasn't his younger son. Ham wasn't his younger son. So when you add it all together, let's go back to the behaviour evolution scriptures. I worded it the way I worded it because I think it makes more sense. And something shady, something sexual in nature, it wasn't just looking at his nakedness, put it that way. It's a similar situation that happened in the garden. When you look at the Hebrew word nakedness and you look at all the connotations of it, it doesn't just mean being unclothed. It doesn't just mean being naked. It means a particular behaviour went down. So some form of nakedness and sexual saucy behaviour went down, and it based on the punishment, I believe it was Ham's son. So whether Ham's son actually slept with Noah's wife himself, or whether Ham's son was watching Noah and his wife have sex, something shady went down. And the punishment was, when Noah awoke from his sleep and found out what had happened and what Canaan had done, he said, Ham, your son, your pervy son, has a curse on him now, and he will be the servant to all his brothers. So the punishment wasn't on Ham, was it? Punishment was on Ham's son. So I believe the crime was committed by Ham's son. The unclean behaviour, looking at nakedness and sex, was done by Ham's son. Of course, Ham was involved with it. Ham didn't do anything about it. Scripture says that. Ham went to tell his brothers, but his brothers didn't think it was funny, because they were taught the same thing by Noach. Clean, upright, good behaviour, you know. So when Noach awoke from his sleep and found out what had happened and what Canaan had done, he said, Ham, your son has a curse on him now, and he will be the servant to all his brothers. I am blessing my son Shem as the firstborn in the name of Yahuwah, and let my son Japheth be strengthened along with him. But you, Ham, your son Canaan will be his servant. So it's basically ripped any kind of birthright or blessing, inheritance from Ham. And this pattern of behaviour continued down the line of Canaan, and we'll look at the family tree a bit later, because Canaan was the father of the Canaanites. Remember the land of Canaan? Canaan? That was the promised land. And you saw what happened. All of Abraham and then Joshua, Yahusha's experiences in the land of Canaan, you saw how pagan and perverse and wicked it was. It all came from this cursed line of Ham. So, your son has a curse on him, and he's going to serve his brothers. The other brothers got the blessing because of their behaviour. So they got blessed because of their behaviour. I hope when we go through these scriptures that, and sometimes I forget too, because you get caught up in the knowledge of it, every scripture is to do with behaviour, brothers and sisters. So I'm trying my hardest to remember to bring everything back to behaviour, because that's what all these stories aren't about us. These stories are to show us behaviour and how Yahusha feels about certain behaviours, because he doesn't change. So looking at nakedness and sex was unclean behaviour. Well, where do we stand today in the 21st century? You know, sex is everywhere. You know, we're borderline nakedness now in commercials, you know. And that's what kids are watching at dinner time. They're like, commercials. Sex sells. Sex is everywhere around us. But what does the scripture say? Looking at a woman lustfully. Nakedness and sex was unclean behaviour, and these men obviously knew this. But there were no 10 Commandments, and there were no... Yeah, but they were taught the instructions from the garden. It was carried through. We've dealt with that in other videos. The 10 Commandments were not a new thing. They were just a formalised remembrance. Remember all these things you were taught? They didn't. So Noah woke up, cursed his son, blessed his other sons. Let's go on. Because we've got some interesting things here from the book of Jubilees that I've added in here. Noah lived another 350 years after the worldwide flood, and he taught his family the instructions and path of Yahusha. How to worship, how to approach and worship him, and how to fight the urges of their flesh against fornication and unclean living, to honour their father and mother, and to love one another. This is all written in the book of Jubilees about Noah. This is what Noah taught before the flood and after the flood. Continued to teach them upright, clean, perfect, spotless behaviour, clean living. And he said, "For I fear that after my death, mankind will start murdering again, spilling each other's blood and eating the blood of flesh again." And Yahuwah, that should say Yahuwah, because Noah wouldn't have said Yahusha, would he? That's a typo there, sorry guys. That should have said Yahuwah. So I'm afraid that all that will happen, and Yahuwah will be forced to destroy you all from the earth. That's a quote. So Noah had that fear. So before he died, he taught his family the right way. And after some time, Shaitan and his unclean, fallen spirits began pestering Noah's grandchildren. So they're back. All the Nephilim were washed away and destroyed, and now they're back. The unclean, wicked spirits are back. Pestering Noah's grandchildren, teaching them all sorts of idolatry, and then inflicting them with multiple diseases in an attempt to destroy them. Because that's what idolatry and unclean behaviour will bring on you: sickness and disease. That's the state of the world we live in today, isn't it? The 21st century. Because of their behaviour, which is our worship. Our worship is our behaviour. And what do you see people out there worshipping? How are they behaving? Are they even interested in Yahusha? What kind of response would you get if you told them about Yahusha? They'd claw your eyes out. So these spirits were inflicting them with multiple diseases in an attempt to destroy the creation. They're still trying to destroy the creation. Still trying to tear down the image of Yahusha. Because we're created, mankind was created in the image of Yahusha. When news of this came to Noah, he fell before Yahusha. "My Father, who has shown complete mercy and kindness, delivering my family through the waters of the great flood and not allowing us to perish, please take the power of these wicked, wretched spirits from my family and heal their wounds, so that they may continue to fill and replenish the earth. You already know how the mighty fathers of these spirits," that's the watchers who fell with Shaitan, "you know how these spirits behaved back in my early days. So please imprison these spirits and hold them securely to await your judgment, and stop them from pestering and tormenting my family." And we spoke about that in our last video. This was when it happened, when Yahusha actually imprisoned a lot of them, the ones responsible for creating the Nephilim and interbreeding with the women. So Yahusha punished them. Yahusha left 1/10 part of these evil spirits on the earth to serve the enemy Shaitan, and he imprisoned the rest of them in the depths of the earth to await his great judgment. We don't know how many there were altogether, but he left 1/10 of them on the earth and imprisoned all the rest in the depths of the earth. And like I said last video, don't go trying to put your ear to the earth or looking down deep canyons to try and hear the spirits. It's a spiritual realm. He's chained them up in the depths of the earth to await his great judgment. And Yahusha instructed his own messengers to teach Noah and his family about herbal remedies and medicines in order for them to treat the ailments and diseases that had been placed upon them by Shaitan and his malignant minions through seduction and deceit. And through this, the enemy was stopped from destroying mankind again. The enemy was stopped again. He could not destroy mankind. He tried, but he couldn't. Trying to tear down that pure bloodline which came through Noach, was preserved through the flood and into Noach. And Noach was delivered through the waters. So he was the pure bloodline, and Shaitan had failed again. And then this is interesting, and then they celebrated the Feast of Weeks, Shabuoth, every year in the same month, as it had been done since the creation for over 1,300 years. And Noach made sure his family remembered the day that they were all delivered through the waters of the global flood at this appointed time. So how can they be doing Shabuoth? Shabuoth is the remembrance of the wedding vows, isn't it? The 10 Commandments given at Sinai. How can they be doing this when Sinai is hundreds and hundreds of years away? Because these harvest feasts have been going on since the beginning of time, brothers and sisters. And it just so happened that they coincided with the deliverance through the waters of the flood. So Noah made sure that his family remembered their deliverance each year at this appointed time. So in doing so, he renewed their covenant with Yahusha each year. Like a wedding anniversary, they remembered the covenant each year. They kind of renewed it each year. Because everything was word of mouth back then. And sometimes you may not see your family for months or even years at a time. So each time of the year, they would renew their covenant, come together and talk about, remember this was the time we were delivered through the great flood. So this was the feast, the harvest feast of Shabuoth. They renewed their covenant with Yahusha each year, and Noach's sons followed his instructions, observing all of Yahusha's appointed harvest feasts, all of them, each year until Noach's death at the age of 950 years. That's a pretty good slog, isn't it? 950 years old. These were the same, in the green here, these were the same appointed times renewed by Musha at Mount Sinai. So Musha was reminding them. They were brought into a formal, official feasts of Yisrael. They were made official at Sinai, but they've been going since the beginning of time. There was nothing new introduced at Mount Sinai. It was all remembrance, and the covenant was tweaked. And I'll explain that in a minute, because everything was about restoration. Remember? Everything was about restoring the covenant back to the Garden of Eden, back to the safe, secure, protected marriage home. And so it had to go in stages because mankind couldn't handle it. You saw what mankind did in the beginning. They disobeyed Yahusha and got kicked out. So throughout the time, it's only 6 days really to Yahusha. Throughout these days, thousands of years, he was restoring his covenant. And he did it little bit by little bit by little bit. And we saw in their last video where he made his first, it was the first official covenant anyway. We know there was a covenant, an agreement, instructions given to Adam and 𝗂𝗓, but the word covenant wasn't officially used. But with Noach, he actually says, I'm formally raising up my blood covenant with you. And the sign of this part of the covenant is that I'm not going to flood the world again. Times and seasons will go on until the very end. So that was part one of the blood covenant, and the sign that was involved with that was the rainbow. And we know that covenant still stands because we still see the rainbow in the clouds. So the whole idea of Yahusha doing away with old covenants and bringing in a new covenant with his blood, no. There was only ever one covenant, an eternal blood covenant of deliverance. It was always about deliverance. The whole point of slaughtering the first lambs after Adam and 𝗂𝗓 sinned or committed their lawless behavior was to bring in deliverance. This is the pathway to deliverance. It was like the Stargate, because Adam and 𝗂𝗓 desperately wanted to be communing, to be relating, communicating into the other dimension, into the other realm where Yahusha was, and they couldn't. They'd been cut off from that dimension. So he's saying to them, if you approach me this way, through the stone table altar, make a table out of stones, slaughter an animal on it, and when I see the blood, I will appear, or I will talk to you, or that's how you approached your Creator, through the blood. And of course, living in the 21st century, looking back, In hindsight, we know the relevance of the blood and what Yahusha did. So Noach taught all his sons this, the right way to live. But afterwards, after Noach died, most of Noach's descendants did away with Yahusha's instructions, and they murdered and ate blood once again, and lived in violence and fornication until the days of Abraham. Interesting the way the scripture talks about that. Of all the horrible, wicked, lawless, evil things, behaviours you could do, that you could list off, it always talks about eating blood. It's like, well, today in our mindset we see people doing it all the time. We just think, yeah, fair enough, murder or, stealing or violence and that sort of thing, and bloodshed and that. But it always mentions they murdered and they ate blood, which means it must mean something really important to Yahusha. Murdering, of course, is shedding blood, and we're not to eat blood, because the life of that animal, the life of that person, that animal, the life of that person that you've murdered, you've just teared down the image of Yahusha. You've killed a person, and the life of that animal is in the blood. The life of the animal is not in the heart, not in the entrails, not in the brain. We need all those organs, but the life itself is in the blood. And we talked about that in our first episode, where we're talking about the blood of mankind and how Yahusha can hear it. The frequency and vibration of mankind's blood is in key, is in sync with Yahusha's ears. He can hear. He can hear all the bloodshed. He can hear all the murder. So what must he be hearing on this earth now, in the 21st century? Let's go on. The normal scriptures have a whole lot of genealogies here, and I've just made it into a little family tree for you there, make it more user-friendly. You can pause it and have a look at it sometime if you want. Some interesting things there. This guy here, Eber. Shem was of the righteous, of the obedient line. Japheth seemed to be in on that, because he was part of the blessing with his brother. Ham, of course, was the cursed line. When you look down Ham's line, you've got Egypt, so the Egyptians. And you've got Canaan over here, the land of Canaan, Sodom and Gomorrah. And there you go. You saw what they were on about. So, and of course Nimrod. Not doing too well, this line of Ham, is it? They've got the Egyptians, he's got Nimrod, and he's got the land of Canaan and Sodom and Gomorrah. So he didn't really produce a very good offspring, a bloodline here, did he? Over on the righteous line here of Shem, we see the word Eber, this guy here, Eber. This is the same word Hebrew that Hebrew comes from. This name was later called Hebrew, referring to Abraham's covenant descendants. And we'll talk about that, because that's very interesting. Why was Abraham called a Hebrew? Why? We'll go into that later. Back over here, we've seen Nimrod was the first self-appointed king. Prior to this, patriarchs and elders of families led the clans and nations. But Nimrod was the first self-appointed king. So, the other interesting thing here, up in the orange arc, we see the three different races. Caucasoid, which is the white man. They wouldn't have been white like I'm white. Like I go out in the sun for 10 minutes and I'm red. I'm from English, Scottish background. So, which is these guys. But back in the days of Noach, they wouldn't have had white skin. But that's where it came from. They had lighter skin than Ham, put it that way. Ham maintained the negroid, the black as the dirt that Adam was created from. And then at Japheth, you've got the Mongoloid, Asian race. So, and then as time went on, obviously, thousands and thousands of years, interbreeding, we've got all the different nations of the world that we have today. But this is where they came from, those three main types, blood types, skin types, the races. So we saw Noach go through a pretty traumatic experience, and he made it through, and he was blessed at the end of it, and his family received the benefits of it. So that was the first. Noach was the first man who official covenant was raised up with him. And we're going to see what happens after Noach dies, and his sons, as it said, did away with the instructions, thought they had better things to do. It's not hard to believe that, is it? We see the world in that exact state today. And they made an official statement, and I'll show you what that statement is. They made a tower. Now, from the beginning of time, all the earth spoke in the ancient Paleo-Hebrew language, not the modern Babylonian captivity, squiggly Hebrew language we see today. And pictographic Hebrew was never even existed. That's man's imagination. So from the beginning of time, all the earth spoke in the ancient Paleo-Hebrew language. And that's why if we want to know what a certain word means, we go back to the Hebrew language. It is still the purest form. It's Yahusha's language. He spoke it up until now. For about the first 2,000 odd years, the whole earth spoke Hebrew. Imagine that, the whole earth spoke the same language. But to no good. And as mankind began to spread out, they found an area in Shinar, Babylon, and led by a descendant of Ham named Nimrod, who was a savage, mighty warrior, completely hell-bent on defying Yahusha and his instructions. They all decided to stay put. What was the command? What was the instruction? Go forth, spread out on the earth, be fruitful, multiply. No, we're going to stay put. Nimrod was the first self-appointed king. He appointed himself on the earth, and his wife/mother, what, he married his mother? Yeah, he was such a pathetic little mama's boy. He married his own mother. Him and Semiramis taught the nations to worship the sun, moon and stars through various abominable practices involving tree worship and the Nazareth zodiac. So we saw in our videos prior to this how mankind from the beginning has been starting to look at the sun, the moon and stars, and pick up bricks and make things out of stone and clay and gold and silver and start worshipping them, which is incredibly offensive to Yahusha, because he created everything in nature. He created everything in the earth, and mankind is worshipping a brick, worshipping a stone, worshipping a toilet seat, or worshipping something ridiculous, you know. So that's why when you're into all these conspiracy theories and Illuminati and, oh, look, that person there's got a star, an upside down star, or I don't know, what are they going on about today? I can't even remember. It's so long ago since I was in all this stuff. Look, you've got a picture of a toilet seat. You're a devil worshipper. You know, no object on this earth is an idol, because idolatry is a behavior. You can't see it because I've got a green screen up here. I've got a silver chrome looking head over there. It looks like an idol, but I don't care. Like, it's pathetic to me. Oh, you can't have idol. That's not an idol. An idol is something you bow down and worship. That's incorrect context. Anything you bow down and worship, I tell you what, most houses have a TV in them, and the TV would be more of an idol these days than something made out of stone, you know, in our modern 21st century mindset, because it's all about behavior. Anything you put more importance and affection and above Yahusha is idolatry, and he hates it because he wants our whole attention. He's a very passionate, jealous Elohim. He says that. So all this symbolic upside down stars and madness they go on about, who cares? It's all rubbish, you know. Idolatry is a behavior, not a symbol. So you can get rid of all that conspiracy rubbish. And this is where it's first mentioned about worshipping the sun, moon and stars, and we know that the tree worship and the Nazareth zodiac, animals in the stars, all that sort of thing, horoscopes, zodiacs, palm reading, all that, it all came from Babylon. It's where it became officialized. It wasn't where it started. That's what we discovered by reading Yasha and Jubilees. We saw that the idolatry didn't start at Babylon. All religions didn't come from Babylon technically. The seeds were sown much earlier than that. But as official, I'm the king and you will worship this, official legislation, it came from Babylon. All religions can be sourced back to the nation of Babylon. And Nimrod, Ha-Shatan, or today people like to call him Santa Claus. That's a whole other study you can do. Before I go on to, that's just one little sentence there. One little sentence, worshipping the sun, moon and stars, abominable practices involving tree worship, Christmas, and the Mazzaroth zodiac. If you want to know more about that, get a book called Fossilized Customs. That's what sort of drew us out of the circus, out of religion, about 15, 20 years ago. And you can only read a couple of pages at a time. You'll feel sick because the whole world is caught up in idol worship, tree worship, Mazzaroth, zodiac, idolatry, spiritual fornication, and Yahusha hates it. And remember, it's a behavior. So go on Amazon, find Fossilized Customs. It's amazing. You can go dive into that. That's all you'll need, that one book, and you'll know all that you need to know about what not to do. So they were hell-bent. Nimrod was hell-bent on defying Yahusha, and they decided to stay put. Nimrod and his mother commanded the people, and the nations declared, here we go, the nations declared, let's make bricks out of stone, use asphalt for mortar, and build ourselves a mighty city with a tower that reaches way up into the sky, and we will make a name for ourselves and rule over ourselves. That's modern humanism, isn't it? We don't need no creator. Mankind is the ultimate El Supremo, and we can rule ourselves, thank you very much. Forget being scattered across the earth. We don't want that. We're staying right here. And they began building a mighty tower to reach the clouds and ensure their own survival if there should ever be another flood. We're not going to be teared down again in another flood. So not only were they ignorant to the covenant made with Noah about Yahusha never flooding the world again, they were going to take matters into their own hands because they were more powerful than Yahusha. So we're going to build a tower big enough, a mighty city, make a name for ourselves on this earth. And if there should ever be a flood, we will be safe from it. Isn't that what the world is doing today? Underground, deep underground military bases, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers deep into the earth. You know, they're building caverns to save. They know mankind is not stupid. They know. Plus there's the influence of unclean spirits too. They know something is happening, something's coming. Scientists say the world is going to be burnt up. Even scientists are declaring that. I mean, it only takes a little from the sun and the earth is just frackled up. That's how delicately balanced. You know, move a couple of mil away and we freeze, move closer to the sun and we all burn up. All it would take is a little surge from the sun and we all burn up. Scientists, atheist, secular scientists believe that. They're surprised it hasn't happened already. So mankind is ensuring its own survival, building taverns, have a drink, caverns underground, deep underground military bases where they're doing all sorts of wacky experimentation like we saw in the last episode. It's not going to work. You can't be saved from a global fire. The planet will be just almost on the brink of destruction until Yahusha restores it. So they made a mighty tower. But Yahusha saw this and said, this is what they do with one mind and one language, disobey me and curse in my face. Who knows what they will achieve with such unity of purpose? It's time to scatter their languages and spread them across the earth as I intended. So wouldn't it have been amazing if they'd used their unity of purpose to do something clean, something obedient, you know? But no, they came together for all the wrong reasons. Idolatry, humanistic. We can rule and govern ourselves. And Yahusha made all their languages confused. And the nations began to spread once more, gathering to anyone whose language they understood and moving away, taking their lawlessness with them. And Yahusha called the place Babel, because it was there that he confused the languages and began scattering the nations across the earth. So clearly, those that had the similar coloured skin, he made similar languages. He's not stupid, is he? So those who had similar appearance, similar coloured skin and similar language, same language, gathered together and took off because you can't communicate. Imagine that it would have been, I mean, we look at it today and don't even think twice. Oh yeah, different languages. That's the world today. But to them, Imagine someone just, so what the hell? Like, it's a bit demon possessed almost. Like, you wouldn't understand it because you've never known it. For 2,000 years almost, the whole earth has been the same language. So to suddenly have all these foreign languages, different languages, they would have been beyond freaked out. They would have been running from each other. And if you came across somebody who was speaking your language, you'd grab them tightly and say, what the hell's going on, man? And you'd find not like-minded, like-speaking people. So before we end this chapter here, this part here, there's no chapters or verses in this scripture. We've got the little interesting map down here, which is the location of Eden, Noah's Ark, and the Tower of Babel. We can see when we look at the map, Garden of Eden, based on the waterways, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in the book of first chapter when we saw that. Garden of Eden in there. And Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat up in here. And they migrated all the way down here to Babylon. So the Tower of Babel was around near Baghdad in modern day Iraq. Very interesting. And so I want you to get familiar with this part of the earth, because until I started looking through this, I'd never really looked at the maps. They were just nice stories. But when you look at it and see that it's a real reality, the towns and places, it's still the same earth, it's still there. The earth, we can see the Sinai desert in here, we see Egypt. And so we're going to see a lot in the chapters coming up, videos coming up, of what goes on in this part of the earth and what Yahusha does and where the promised land is. And I've brought in more detailed maps later on. But for now, this part of the story, it's just interesting to see where the Noah's Ark was, which they've discovered. So it's true, they have discovered it. And then they came down to Babylon. So we see seeds forming of what the world is like today at the end of almost the 6th day of in Yahusha's time. We see that Yahusha was working overtime to start introducing mankind once again and wash their minds with this concept of covenant. If you want to communicate with me, you need to make an effort. There needs to be blood. And you don't have to make a huge effort. That's the thing. Yahusha looks at our hearts and he sees the intentions. And if even we just cry out and approach him a little, he runs the rest of the way to love us and lift us up and encourage us. His thoughts towards us are as many as the sand of the sea on the sand of the sea shore. So he makes that effort. Look at the prodigal son. The father came running to the son from way off in the distance. He saw him coming, a little speck, and he ran to kiss him. And he wept over him, put his hands around him, arms around him, hugged him, kissed him. That's how Yahusha feels about his bride, brothers and sisters. That's how Yahusha feels about you. And we get lost in all this knowledge at times in scripture and covenants and instructions and you must do this. And it's all about love. Yahusha was teaching them from a very early time. If you want to approach me, this process of redemption, this process of deliverance, this restoration is going to take time. So he was washing their minds. If you want to approach me, put some stones together, make a little bit of an altar, and sacrifice an animal on it. And when I see the blood, I will see that you really mean it, that you're repentant. And so he responds to that. So at the same time, Yahusha's introducing deliverance and introducing a process of restoration back into the tree of life, back into his covenant home. The enemy is working overtime to destroy it all, to tear it all down. So we know that Noah was a pretty prominent figure here, and based on his behavior, he taught his family the right way. But what happened after he died? It all started to fall apart again. Because like I said in a few videos ago, it only takes for one man to not teach his family anything, and they lived for such long, hundreds and hundreds of years, that it didn't take long at all for the population to just disregard Yahusha whatsoever. And when you disregard Yahusha, the human body is designed to adore, worship, serve something. So if you're not, and of course we were created to put that attention on Yahusha. He is to be the source of our worship, the source of our servitude. And if we ignore him, it's in our nature to crave after something else. We have to fill that with something, because it's a big void. If you tear Yahusha out of somebody and they no longer they walk away from him, they have to do something, apart from go mad. They have to put something in that place. And that's why mankind raised up with the influence of unclean spirits. Idolatry, spiritual fornication, adultery, things made of stone and wood and gold and silver, all in Yahusha's face. So he scattered their languages and said, get out of here, do what you're told. Get out of here and do what you're told. So that was the story. We're going to leave it there, brothers and sisters, as far as the Tower of Babel. We can see that is where all religion came from, and there are thousands of religions on the earth today, and they all come from the Tower of Babel. Babylon, the pantheon, all the different deities. Because all the deities that we will later see, and we're going to go into in depth when we get to the Exodus story, they all came from Babel. They just get renamed because it says, remember, they took their lawlessness with them. The whole Trinity, Father, Mother, Son, deity of Trinity, that sort of BS rubbish. They took all those names and they just changed the names and took them into their different languages. Until today, you've got the Father and you've got Mary and you've got JSUS. It's all rubbish. It doesn't exist. It's not true. And like Christopher was posting the other day, it doesn't. People spend their whole life, all their energy, laborious labour of worship, and all their money and tithes and everything to something that doesn't exist. So the moral of this story, brothers and sisters, is we can see that there's a battle between good and evil. And let's bring it right close to home. Day to day, thought by thought, you are in a battle. The enemy wants your heart, your worship, your servitude, and so does Yahusha. But Yahusha doesn't play dirty. He's put out the instructions that says, if you want me, this is where you'll find me. But Ⅎ𝗏 is the identity thief. He's a filthy little liar. Scamming little punts. He's got no personality or character, no strength. He's going to lose, and he knows it, so he's going to take as many people to destruction as he can. Is it going to be you? Are you firmly, securely anchored on this pathway that you're on? Because if you are, everything's going to come against you. And it could be the people closest to you, friends, family, husbands, wives, that try to knock you off your path. But if you stand firmly, like a tree planted by the waters, and you go through the Hebrews 12 experience, being flogged and chastised and rebuked and disciplined in the ways and the pathway of Yahusha, you will bear fruit. What is the fruit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control. They're all behaviours. It's all behaviour, brothers and sisters. If you stick in there, stay in there, even if something happens and you fall over, even if you sin, I hate that word sin, even if you do something evil, lawless, sin sounds very religious, doesn't it? Lawlessness it is. Anything against Yahusha's instructions is lawless. It's evil, wicked, unclean behaviour. If you do something like that, get back up. Don't listen to all the thoughts that condemn you, because they're wicked. They tempt you to do it, and if you go along with it, then they bash you and batter you and blame you and make you want to kill yourself. So don't listen to it. Even if you stumble and fall, just get back up. Even if you don't have the strength to take a step forward on this path, just stand still. Stand through the cyclone. Stand there. Don't be moved. It says in the scripture, I shall not be moved. Oh, you're not going to move me. Anything can come at me. You're not going to move me. I'm not going back. Because that's what everybody and everything wants you to do. To go back. Go back to your old behaviour. If they can make you angry. This is what we were talking about with Christopher yesterday. If someone can make you angry, children, wives, husbands, staff, clients, workmates, if people can make you angry, then they're very happy. Because then they don't have to look at their behaviour. So face that you're in a battle, brothers and sisters. Put your armour on. Sword, shield, breastplate, helmet. The minute your eyes flicker open in the morning, the minute your brain switches on, Put your armor on, because that wicked demon, devil, Ⅎ𝕗𝕗𝑆𝑎𝑡𝑎𝑛 is at you. The dragon wants to destroy you, brothers and sisters. That's the practical application of this scripture that I'm getting. It's all behaviour. Good behaviour and evil behaviour. What's going to win in your life, brothers and sisters? Because if you want to overcome, you've got to take this seriously. And it's all about your behaviour. That's why the Behaviour Revolution got given 3 simple rules. Don't take anything personally. Let everybody have it. What does let everybody have it mean? It means even if you don't agree with somebody's opinion, you let them feel heard. You let them feel accepted. And you let them feel right in the communication. You don't have to argue the point. Sometimes Yahusha will get you to speak out and say, oh, that's not true. But generally in everyday, we're walking in amongst the walking dead. They're dead, they're zombies, they're lifeless, they're shells of death and misery on the path to destruction. Why would you bother arguing? Why would you bother even interacting like in that kind of way? Let them have their madness. Let them have it. And just love them. Let them feel accepted and heard and understood. I just want someone to understand me. Understand them. And don't make excuses. Don't tell lies. Speak the truth. Love you, brothers and sisters. See you next time. We're going to go into the life of Abraham. Bye.